Telling Tales. The Big Bad Wolf. My daughter lays dead in my arms, having been struck down by the wolf. Once upon a time, in a village not far from here, there lived a shepherd and his son Farley. Farley, like many boys of his time, had no love for shepherding. He longed for adventure, to be a hero of the realm like the kings and lords that owned his land. He would often abandon his duties to play in the woods, much to the disappointment of his father, which would be a crime bad enough, but worse are his lies. Farley was a serial liar. He lacked all ability to speak the truth. His father threatened many a time to remove the boy's wagging tongue. He thought no ill of the boy playing in the woods and skipping his duties every once in a while. He was a boy, and he would learn, but to lie over and over again with his "No, father," and "I never did, father," it grew too painful for the old shepherd to bear. Farley's father sought to teach his boy a lesson which would hopefully deter him from ever setting foot in the woods again, an extreme punishment, but a much-needed one. He reasoned the only way to stop his son from lying about going into the woods was to lie to his son about what was in the woods. "A wolf, father?" Farley asked. "Yes, my boy, a wolf so big and so bad, villagers build walls around themselves to keep it out," the shepherd replied. But much to the behest of his father, the lie only fueled the boy's fibbing. Farley would run out into the village and tell all the other children about the big bad wolf that lived in the woods, and all the children would tell their parents, who in turn would set up their defences ready for any possible attack. The shepherd, a man who much regretted his faults, tried to calm his fellow villagers by outing his son for the liar he was. Farley couldn't understand why his father would lie about the wolf not being there, when he'd taken up so much effort to convince him. He kept telling the villagers the same story about how the wolf did live in the woods, and could attack them at any moment. The shepherd fell to his knees amongst his flock and prayed to the goddess to forgive him his trespasses. She came to him in the body of the mother wolf, fury in her eyes. "You dare speak ill of one of my creatures. You dare punish your son with your falsehoods. He is but a boy. He will learn. But you should have learnt long ago that a lie cannot be quenched with another. If it's a wolf you want, then a wolf you shall have." The goddess created a wolf so vicious and so cruel that the sheep keeled over in horror, their wool falling freely from their deceased bodies. The wolf turned on the shepherd, leaving nothing but his staff, and had headed out into the village. Farley had witnessed the scene between his father and the goddess, and tried to warn the village folk, but of course they refused to listen, and none but Farley was spared. "I will come for you, boy. When you are old and defenceless, I shall return for you, as it was your lying that led to my coming in the first place." And of course Farley understood the wolf's words, because he'd looked upon the goddess, and those who look upon the gods are gifted with the ability to speak with their creatures. Decades passed, and Farley made home with a young milkmaid 2 villages over. Together they had a son who took on a wife of his own, and they had a babe named Peter. With Peter's birth, the wolf returned and killed his parents and grandmother. He had planned to finally claim the life of Farley too, but the man had predicted his coming. He took Peter and hid in the woods he'd played in growing up. The wolf spent 16 years trying to seek Farley and his grandson, and spent this time tormenting the poor animals that lived on the outskirts of the woods. He took a liking to adorning disguises and once pretended to be a mother goat in order to trick her 7 kids into being eaten by him. Only one survived and chased him off with a pair of scissors. He then went after a family of pigs, 5 in total. He killed the mother as she went to the market to fetch supplies. He got the father as he was staying home and digging into his roast beef dinner, leaving their youngest son with none. The boy cried all the way back to his own house, a house made of straw. It took another day before the wolf found the 3 houses on the outskirts of the woods. One made of straw, which was easily brought down. One made of sticks, which cracked and crumbled as it fell. Both residents, abhorrent to guilt, were devoured by the hungry wolf. When he couldn't break his way into the 3rd sibling's house made of brick, he stormed back into the woods. Peter had a fondness for animals. He had of course inherited the ability to speak with them from his grandfather. He would often play outside with his friends the duck and the raven. Despite being friends, the 2 birds would often squabble with each other about whether it was better to swim or to fly. Peter would often act as mediator between the two, but on this particular day, during this particular argument, he heard a snapping of twigs nearby and looked away from his friends long enough for a cat to get hold of the duck. The raven squawked to warn Peter, and he managed to free the duck just in time for the wolf to make his appearance. "I found you," said the wolf. "After all these years, I finally found you." Peter scooped up his friends and, pursued by the cat, ran back to his home. Farley heard the commotion and knew immediately the day had come where he must face the wolf head-on. He ushered Peter and his friends behind him and picked up his rifle. "I'm a creature of no physical flesh, Farley. You cannot shoot me dead." The wolf laughed as he approached. Farley let off one warning shot, but still the wolf approached before leaping at the old man. "Run!" Farley yelled as Peter dashed past him out the door. The raven and the duck circled above the head of the wolf as he distracted himself by toying with the cat. Peter threw them a vine which he'd found on the floor, and the birds tied it into a noose, which they threw over the wolf's neck. Peter grabbed the end of the vine and dragged the wolf over to a branch where he intended on hanging him, but the wolf proved too strong and broke free. It was a valiant fight between Peter and the wolf, but the wolf won out in the end. He howled a victorious howl as the birds and the cat bowed their heads and scampered off into the woods. This is where I come into the story. Myself and a new friend, a small pig from another realm by the name of Truffles, had heard the wolf's howl and fled to safety. We were taken in by the third little pig into his house of brick, but the wolf managed to break his way in through the window and tried to get to us, scratching my face in the process. I threw boiling water upon him, and he stumbled into the fireplace where he howled in pain. Shadow wolves are of course no match for flames. He howled in agony, and I thought that was that. I said goodbye to Truffles and the little pig, and made my way back to meet my daughter Scarlet at my mother's house. I'd sent her off before me, when the sun was at its brightest, so she could find the way easier, and I could follow behind foraging for dinner. By the time I got back onto the path, she was already miles ahead of me. The wolf, who had not perished, overheard my conversation with the little pig, and where I was heading next, and got a head start towards my daughter. My daughter, Little Red Riding Hood, as she was so named by the scarlet cape her father had gifted to her from his own back, was a precious girl. She was my everything, the reason why I woke up every morn. Her father, William Scarlet, is away in another realm, fighting alongside his brother, and for a while it was just our daughter, named Scarlet after her father, and I. We'd occasionally make treks to my mother's cottage on days like this, so Little Red was more than used to the journey. What she wasn't used to, and what I am ashamed to say I never taught her, was how to deal with wolves. The big bad wolf caught up with my daughter, and persuaded her to stray from the path by claiming to be a friend of mine. She trusted him, as she had no other reason not to, and led him to my mother's house. He wasted no time in swallowing my mother whole and holding my daughter captive in the closet. He donned my mother's clothing, and when I finally made my way in, I was too distracted by unpacking my goods that I didn't look towards the bed. "Good evening, dear," I thought my mother had said. "Oh, Mother, your voice sounds rather gruff today," I replied as I unpacked some mushrooms. The wolf slithered out of bed and dragged my daughter out of the closet. "I require something sweet to soothe my aching throat." I immediately knew it was the wolf, but I turned too late as he tore a chunk out of my daughter's neck, killing her instantly. I screamed out in agony, clutching my torn heart as the wolf crawled closer and closer to me. "Perhaps now you'll know never to mess with the big, bad wolf." He laughed as I reached for an axe, resting against the wall. With all the strength I had, I raised my axe high above my head and brought it down on the wolf, separating his head from his body. The fire from earlier had weakened his body enough to the point he died with the blow. I didn't care about him. All I cared about was my sweet little girl, and now I'm here cradling her lifeless body in my arms as I think of all the ways, any way, in which I can return her back to me.